Hello, good morning. You can hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Well, as you all know, in just 5 days from now, we will be making the 70th anniversary of that extraordinary document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is, and I firmly believe on that it continues to be as relevant today as when it was adopted 70 years ago. Arguably even more so, because as over the passing decades, it has passed from being an aspirational treatise into a set of standards that has permeated virtually every area of international law. It has withstood the test of the passing years and the advent of dramatic new technologies and social, political, and economic development that its drafters could not have foreseen. Its precepts are so fundamental that they can be applied to every new dilemma. The Universal Declaration gives us the principles we need to govern artificial intelligence and the digital world. It lays out a framework of responses that can be used to counter the effects of climate change on people, if not on the planet. It provides us with the basis for ensuring equal rights for groups such as LGBTI people, whom few would even dare name in 1948. Everyone is entitled to all the freedom listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I quote, "Without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status." And the last words of that sentence, other status, have frequently been cited to expand the list of people specifically protected, not just LGBTI people, but also persons with disabilities, who now have a convention of their own, adopted in 2006, elderly people, who may soon get one as well, indigenous people, minorities of all sorts, everyone. The other really interesting thing is that gender is a concept that is addressed in almost every clause of the Declaration. For its time, the document was remarkably lacking in sexist language. Aside from the single phrase himself and his family, which appears twice, the document refers to everyone, all, or no one throughout its 30 articles. This trailblazing language reflects the fact that for the first time in the history of international lawmaking, women play a prominent role in drafting the Universal Declaration. The role that everyone knows, that Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, who shared the drafting committee, but on the other hand, less well known are women from Denmark, Pakistan, the communist bloc, and other countries around the world who also made a crucial contribution. Indeed, it is thanks primarily to the Indian drafter Hans Hameta that the French phrase, "all men are born free and equal," taken from the Declaración des droits de l'homme et des citoyens, became in the Universal Declaration, "all human beings are born free and equal." A simple, but in terms of women's rights and of minority rights, a revolutionary phrase. Hans Hameta objected to Eleanor Roosevelt's assertion that men was understood to include women, the widely accepted idea at that time. She argued that countries could use this wording to restrict the rights of women rather than expand them. And I believe she was quite right. Born out of the devastation of the two world wars, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the Holocaust, the Universal Declaration is geared to prevent similar disasters and the tyranny and violation which caused them. It sets out ways to prevent us from continuing to harm each other and aims to provide us with freedom from fear and want. It sets limits on the powerful and inspires hope among the powerless. Over the 7 decades since its adoption, the Universal Declaration has underpinned countless beneficial changes in the lives of millions of people across the world, permeating some 90 national constitutions and numerous and many national, regional, and international laws and institutions. But 70 years after its adoption, the work the Universal Declaration proposes is far from over. Indeed, it never will be. In 30 crystal clear articles, the Universal Declaration shows us the measures which will end extreme poverty and provide food, housing, health, education, jobs, and opportunities for everyone. It lights the path to a world without wars and holocaust, without torture or famine or injustice, a world where misery is minimized and no one is too rich or powerful to evade justice, a world where every human has the same worth as every other human, not just at birth, but for the duration of their entire lives. So the drafters wanted to prevent another war by tackling the root causes, by setting down the rights everyone on the planet could expect and demand simply because they exist, and to spell out in no uncertain terms that what cannot be done to human beings. The poor, the hungry, the displaced, and the marginalized, drafters aim to establish systems to support and protect them. The right to food and to development is crucial, but this has to be achieved without discrimination on the basis of race, gender, or other status. So you cannot say to your people, I will feed you, but I won't let you speak or enjoy your religion or your culture. So these rights to land and adequate housing are absolutely basic, and yet in some countries, austerity measures are eroding those very rights for the most vulnerable. Climate change can undermine the right to life, to food, to shelter, and to health. And these are all related, and the Universal Declaration and International Human Rights Convention provide a roadmap to their achievement. So I'm convinced that the human rights ideal laid down in this declaration had been one of the most constructive advances of ideas in human history, as well as one of the most successful. But today, that progress is under threat. We are born free and equal, but millions of people on this planet do not stay free and equal. Their dignity is trampled, and their rights are violated on a daily basis. In many countries, the fundamental recognition that all human beings are equal and have inherent rights is under attack. The institutions so painstakingly set up by the state to achieve common solutions to common problems are being undermined. And the comprehensive web of international, regional, and national laws and treaties that gave teeth to the vision of the Universal Declaration is also being chipped away by governments and politicians increasingly focused on narrow nationalist interests. So we all need to stand up more energetically for the rights it shows us everyone should have, not just ourselves, but all our fellow human beings, and which we are at constant risk of eroding through our own and our leaders' forgetfulness, neglect, or wanton disregard. So I will end where the Universal Declaration begins, with the powerful promise and warning contained in the first lines of its preamble. I will quote, "Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." And then continues, "Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people." Continues then, "It is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law." And we will do well to pay more attention to the final words of the same preamble. And I quote, "Every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for those rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the people of member states themselves and among the people of territories under their jurisdiction." So we have come a long way down this path since 1948. We have taken many of progressive measures prescribed by the Universal Declaration at the national and international levels. But we still have a long way to go, and too many of our leaders seem to have forgotten these powerful and prophetic words. So we need to rectify that, not just today, not just on the 70th anniversary next Monday, but every day, every year. Human rights defenders the world over are on the front lines of defending the Universal Declaration through their work, their dedication, and their sacrifice. No matter where we live or what our circumstances are, most of us do have the power to make a difference, to make our homes, communities, countries, and our work and world better or worse for others. So each of us needs to do our part to breathe life into the beautiful dream of the Universal Declaration. For this was the gift of our ancestors to help us avoid ever having to go through what they went through. So that's my starting words, and I'll give the moderation to Rupert.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Perhaps if we could take questions in groups of 3. I see rebellion against tyranny in the room, but
you know why? Because otherwise I speak too long. So there will be only a couple of questions. No, but where's the problem?
Let's do it in 3. It's a little bit easier because this is a vast topic, so it's a little bit easier for the High Commissioner to think through the answers. If we have, well, let's take the first 3 in a row there. They were first up. Jamil.
Mr. Bachelet, Jamil Shadi from Estado de São Paulo in Brazil. You mentioned the task to avoid tyranny coming from the declaration. You were a victim of the wave of dictatorships in South America. But now Mr. Bolsonaro denies that even happened in Brazil and even praised Mr. Pinochet. What is your view of his denial of history and the denial of history itself? Also, he has promised to flexibilize the laws to make it easier for the population to have access to guns. You know that hate speech has been in a rise in Latin America. So what is your view also on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie Nebehe, Reuters. Madam High Commissioner, you referred to international treat.
Yes, sorry, because sometimes. Yes?
I'll start again. You referred to international treaties and laws being chipped away by governments and politicians increasingly focused on nationalist agendas. Could you tell us whether you have concerns about migrants from Central America not being able to access asylum procedures on the U.S. side of the border with Mexico, and how you view that that situation, whether it's a contrived crisis or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Engelhardt of German National Public Radio. I'm following up from Stephanie a bit. Could you reflect on how generally the discussion we're having at the moment globally on the treatment of migrants is probably one of the challenges to the human rights as they're enshrined in the Declaration? And I'm asking this also because I understand that you're spending Human Rights Day not here in Geneva celebrating the 70th anniversary, but rather in Marrakesh. Thanks.
Jamil, I didn't hear exactly. Can you repeat that? Because I got something, because I prefer to hear it now.
The second question is the fact that Mr. Bolsonaro has
the access to guns, I understood.
Okay.
The first one is the one.
The first one, he denies that dictatorship actually happened in Brazil, and he did actually praise Mr. Pinochet.
Okay, yeah, I got that part like that. Okay, well, I do believe that in Latin America we had a time where we had lots of dictatorships in many countries of the world. And I do believe that in Brazil there was a dictatorship, and that there were victims of the dictatorship, and there was torture, and there has been commissions of inquiry looking after all these things. And of course in Chile also we had a dictatorship for 17 years, and Pinochet was not elected by the people. He did a coup d'etat, and there was lots of people who disappeared, who were killed, who were tortured, who were in prison, and so on. So I hope that in Latin America we have learned the lesson that even though democracies are not perfect, democracy is the best way for the people to be able to develop and to have the rights and opportunities that they deserve. And I have the impression that even though we have seen in many parts that dealing with situations of violence or insecurity, some people tend to think that the solution is the sort of a, how could I say, the right word is the sort of a strong solution. At least in Spanish, they speak like a strong solution, thinking on sort of involving much more militaries, for example, to deal with delinquency or violence. I do not agree with that. I mean, I don't believe that that's how we should do it. I think, and I'm also not in favor of giving guns without control. We have seen what has happened in many places, people who use guns to do mass shooting, kill children at schools, etc. So I do believe that guns are very dangerous in the hands of the people who may not know how to use it in the right way. So I hope that this announcement, I mean, until now we haven't seen anything yet, so it's just an announcement. We'll see what happens afterwards. But of course, as Brazil and every other country, we are following closely. On the migrants issues, well, we have two different things right now. One of is the migrant caravan of around 7,000 people going from countries of Central America towards the U.S., and then you have two kinds of people, because you have people who are migrants, and it's different than people who are refugees. And the ones who are refugees, they are protected by international law, and they should be accepted or not, but treated in an adequate way. And you also have migrants, and that speaks to me about the need of those countries where those people left to ensure better conditions for the people. I mean, I think that migration should be tackled in a way to look at the root causes of migration. And that's one of the issues of the Global Compact on migration that will be adopted on the 10th and 11th of December in Marrakesh, that intends to look at migration in a holistic and comprehensive way, to deal with the root causes, but also to include sort of a regulation of a process, because everyone understands that migrants are looking for a better opportunities, but of course if one day arrives to a country to 1 million people, it's difficult for a country to deal with it, because it needs to provide protection, housing, food, etc. So what the Global Compact looks after is to provide sort of a big framework where everybody can agree with. It was negotiated for member states, that will provide this sort of all these standards that should be followed, but adapted in every country to its own situation. So I hope on the case of the migrants from Central America that the ones who are refugees and are asylum seekers will be accepted in a reasonable time, but in any minute, I think they should be treated as human beings. Some of them will be accepted probably in the U.S. and some of them not. And President of Mexico, just in office, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has said that he will look after the migrants, and he will, in the southern part of Mexico, he will be making a lot of measures to improve the economy, and that many of people could stay there. So it's just starting office since the 1st of December, but he has opened and that possibility. On the other hand, some of the countries, the original countries, have mentioned the possibility of people going back, and to create opportunities and so on. This hasn't happened yet, but that some people may want to go back to their homes. So we are going to celebrate the 70th anniversary in different places. I'm traveling tomorrow to Johannesburg. We're going to do a big ceremony, celebration there with three objectives, if I would say. They will celebrate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 70th anniversary, but also the 100th anniversary of, since it was born, Nelson Mandela and Albertina Sisulu. So it will be there. Then we're going to go to Marrakesh, and we'll participate there. And at the end of the first day, we're going to do a ceremony with, I hope some of my predecessors too will be there. Of course, Louise Arbour, because she's the chair of all these negotiations on the Global Compact. But they have told me that maybe Mary Robinson and Nabi Pillay might be there too. There's going to be a ceremony with the Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly. But then afterwards, we are going to, well, I'm going to go to Madrid because we're going to do something about the declaration too in Madrid, and then to Poland. But in Poland, I will be on the COP24, talking about climate change and human rights and people who, because of climate change, are displaced, and all the things that, how the climate change affects women and men, etc. And then we're coming here to Geneva on the 13th, I guess, yes. On the 13th, we will have a celebration here. So we have also celebrations other parts of the world, in LA, in Manchester, in Santiago, but I didn't go there. So different people from the office has been going to different places.
Other side of the room. Next.
Catherine de Fiancamboconga for France 24, French TV. A couple of questions. The first is a follow-up about the migration question. The government of Denmark has announced that he will, in fact, deport stateless people and also asylum seekers on an island. What is your reaction toward that, and also the reaction toward what's happening with Italy and other European countries that are not respecting the basic international rules of the protection not only of migrants but of refugees? That is my first question. The second question is about the use of military force that you just mentioned. In your answer on Latin America, I would like also to have your opinion about Africa, the African continent, and particularly what's happening in DRC. What about the presidential election that has been always pushed back since 2015? And I think that's it.
A lot of questions. I think
no, I take the opportunity, you know. Thank you.
Stéphane Dussart, Le Temps newspaper. There's a recurrent criticism about of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Basically, people saying that it's too Western document in the sense, and we could see that in the Human Rights Council, for example, with the rise of certain powers. They put into question the fact that also with the liberal order of the post-war time, that this declaration is not universal. And how do you counter this kind of cultural relativism? Thank you.
Hi, Ben from AFP. My question on the UDHR is really about enforcement. I think when it was written, it was quite clear that it was a statement of principles, but ultimately one that had to be backstopped by states. And I think there are a lot of people in the human rights community, including academics, who would say it was the United States that was primarily responsible for the ascendancy of human rights as a foreign policy issue, hypocrisies notwithstanding. Surely you must be concerned that as the world's most powerful country is conducting itself globally with human rights very much on the back burner, that the relevance of the text in world affairs is diminishing day by day.
Well, on your question on Denmark, I understand that as I mentioned before, sometimes there are difficulties encountered in returning migrants to their countries of origins when they're not accepted as a refugee. But they should be addressed in a safe and human way, manner, but on the basis of course, individual assessment, and not in ways that will increase harm, which this plan is very likely to do, because we have seen the negative impact of such policies of isolation, and should not replicate these policies. Because depriving them of their liberty, isolating them, and stigmatizing them will only increase their vulnerability. And this is linked also with something else that you have mentioned, that unfortunately you, in this time, sometimes you listen to leaders that should be given the example, that should be the ones who should stand up for human rights of people, to use words that are wrong ones, like mentioning that people are undesirable. They don't, and that they must notice that they're undesirable. So I think that kind of words, or other that you can listen in different parts of the world and Europe, serves to increase stigma and hate, fueling divisions, and many times also xenophobia. So I have serious concern with this plan, and we will monitor it and discuss it, of course, with the government. On the DRC, yes, we have elections in December. I think it's the 23rd or 21 of December. And we have documented, because we see it usually before pre-elections and during elections, we have seen documented an increase in human rights violations in the run-up to the elections. And we always want to encourage authorities and the opposition to implement the commitment made on the 31st of December 2016, and that included to release all political prisoners, accountability for human rights violations, ban on use of lethal force during demonstration by the police or the security forces. And we also believe that we have seen also continuing clashes in some parts of the DRC in North Kivu, and that has meant that the proliferation of some armed groups and interethnic violence have resulted in large-scale displacement. And also some of this, in North Kivu, some of these groups that are armed, and you know that there has been an outbreak of Ebola in that part of DRC, that started on the 1st of August this year, and where we have seen like more than 300 cases that confirm, and more than 100 deaths. But also the killings and the abductions in that part has signified some obstacle for the teams, for the healthcare teams who are working there, trying to provide vaccination, medicines, and all kind of health care for the people who are confirmed or who they are suspicious of having Ebola. So those are the three kinds of problems that we have in DRC right now. I mean, the violence before elections, the armed groups that still with clashes in the North Kivu area, and also the Ebola that is being controlled, but I want to be careful about it because we don't know how it will continue developing. Yes, I've heard many times that the Human Rights Declaration, it's not only the human rights, that the concept of human rights, it's Western, and that there can be different cultures. But first of all, I think people don't know that the drafters came from all over the world, that you have people from, as I mentioned, not only women from all over the world, of course Western, but also from India, from the different countries, Lebanon, and we had Chilean, Mendel, Peruvian, so we had people from all over the world. And if I may say it in a way that it could sound naive, but I don't think any woman, doesn't matter from which region of the world she lives, in which ethnic group she pertains, in which religion she has or culture she has, doesn't want its child to be born adequately, to have food, to be warm when it's cold. So I believe this is universal. I mean, if you read all the different articles, I mean, all of them speak about what people really want for their lives, that would dream for their lives. So that's not, I don't think the essential things of the Universal Declaration, everybody wants to have the possibility to speak up if he wants to speak, to be able to associate with others, to organize their communities, to have freedom to travel where they want to have. So I think, of course, we could go to have a nationality, for example. That's something that it does not, to have their own religion. That's not Western. This is something that pertains to everyone. So I do not believe in that. And I think that sometimes people want to relativize just to justify why they don't respect human rights. But the truth is that when you read all the articles, they are all universal. They're really universal. Oh, sorry, there's something else. I didn't know if you were asking me a question or you were making your comment.
What is your level of concern about the future of this text in a context where there is, as far as I'm aware, no major global power that really pays much attention to it?
Well, I would say that we are living in a challenging environment in terms of, on one hand, multilateralism is being eroded, and I truly believe that we have global challenges that need global responses, that no country can solve all the issues by itself. No one can be an island. It won't work that way. And that is one thing. And the other thing is we have been seeing also pushbacks on human rights. And when leaders speak about things or say some things like the ones I mentioned, that they speak against migrants or a sort of hate speech or xenophobic speech, you are giving license to other people not to respect people's rights. So I truly believe my message will be to all leaders of the world. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but all leaders of the world is to lead by example, using, with human rights as an important part of their lives, as an important part of their message and language, because that's the way societies will behave afterwards too. So I think leaders need to be responsible for what they say and needs to really lead by example.
So, John?
Over here.
Okay.
Good morning, High Commissioner. John Zarakostas for The Lancet. I was wondering if you could first, given that it is the Universal Declaration and there is that famous Article 19, if we could have your views, if you have asked, or any of the thematic rapporteurs have asked for the evidence in the hands of the Turkish authorities concerning the killing of the journalist Mr. Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The criticism coming from senior officials in the human rights community in Geneva is that the response of Geneva has been reactive and not proactive. Thank you.
Gabriela.
That she will answer. Buenos días, Alta Comisionada, bienvenida. I would like to know what do you think of the project announced by the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, to create a National Guard, Guardia Nacional in Spanish? We thought that he would announce a gradual retirement of the army, but this program is exactly the opposite. So I would like to know, what do you think about that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth Isakova from Russian news agency RIA Novosti. I have a couple of questions. First, about the situation in France. How do you assess the current situation in France and the reaction of the authorities on the demonstrators, especially the use of force against demonstrators, because journalists are also suffering from this? And my second question is about the martial law in Ukraine. Do you think the implementation of this law now was justified right before the elections? Thank you.
Is it working? Yes. Okay. I think we have mentioned from the beginning that, first of all, there were three special rapporteurs, the special rapporteur on torture, the special rapporteur on freedom of speech, was it, I guess, and the special rapporteur on extrajudiciary killings that call for international investigation, and we also call for international investigation. We don't have the mandate to do a criminal investigation, so we ask. We mentioned to the Secretary General that we thought it was needed a criminal investigation, international investigation, and he needs to. But that there's also some. It's not in its personal attribution. It needs a member state to ask for. I mean, there is a methodology that needs to be done with member states and the Security Council. So I do believe that is really needed in terms of ensuring what really happened and who are the responsible for that awful killing. But we do believe also, and I do believe that all journalists should be protected, and that is one of our, I would say, priorities, is to protect human rights defenders and journalists. It is on our plan, because we believe that, of course, Mr. Khashoggi's case was very well known, but we receive reports monthly or weekly sometimes that of journalists being threatened or sometimes even killed in many countries of the world. So we need to ensure that the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression and opinion can be ensured. So I don't think we had a reactive. We were waiting for information to know, because you cannot react on only rumors or when you don't have the information. So, but we don't have the mandate to do a criminal investigation.
In all due respects, my question was, have you asked for the evidence from the Turkish authorities or thematic rapporteurs, and have you received this evidence that the Turkish president has shared with many member states of the Human Rights Council?
No, we have not received any information. On Gabriela, well, I have read something about it. I don't know the details of the position on the National Guard. What it's true, though, is the following: that Mexico, I think, has have a situation with the police forces who are very fragmented. They depend a lot on the mayors, and you know what has happened, and we saw it with the situation on the 43 students who disappeared, that there was sort of how would I say, a linkage between police forces, drug traffickers, etc. So I don't know the details. Of course, the idea to have sort of a National Guard, if it meant to have one single police force that can have one command, and in that sense, depending on the Minister of Interior, that is a model that's not a problem. What we have to be very aware of, if it includes the militarization of the forces, that wouldn't be good. But if the idea is sort of to have a police force that will be with people avoiding other kinds of linkages with corruption or with drug trafficking, etc., that's not a bad thing in itself, but we needed to know exactly what does it mean. So we will be looking after that. But one thing I want to mention about Mexico, because I think it's really important, is what's happened yesterday. yesterday, and I have the decree here, the elected president, just now president in office, he made the first decree was on his commitment and the task he gave to the judiciary system, to the government, that to establish the truth and justice for the victim of the Ayotzinapa case of the 43 students and 3 normalists who were killed. The 3 students, 43 are disappeared, but supposedly killed. And he made a very strong commitment with a special decree in hand to ensure that the truth will be brought, there will be justice, and there won't be impunity. So I think that's a real important issue in Mexico's situation that I wanted to bring, because it was with the families will be part, there will be a commission where the families will be part, the lawyers of the families, and, as I said, at least 3 ministries and the judiciary system. So I think this is a very important step for those families. Since 2014 have been waiting to know what happens to them, to their children. And yes, I'm trying to understand what I wrote down. Yes. Well, I think that it's important that that people are able to freely exercise their freedom, their right to freedom of expression, and to peaceful assembly and association. So, on one hand, I could also urge all demonstrators to protest peacefully and appeal to all parties to refrain from the use of violence. So I think that all sides should work to resolve the situation through calm discussion and dialogue. And I know the effort of the governments to engage in dialogue with political leaders and representatives of the protesters, and I hope that goes well, because I think they have the right to protest peacefully. On Ukraine, on the martial law, we have been monitoring the impact of the adopted measures in the 10 regions of Ukraine where the martial law was introduced. And I believe that in any minute, but particularly close to elections, that's even more important, any measures that restrict human rights during a state of martial law must be limited to the extent strictly required by the exigencies of the situations. So that means that should be proportional, and limited to what is really necessary in terms of how long it will stay, the geographical coverage, and the material scope. That's what we believe. And we don't know, I cannot say if it was adequate to do a martial law or not, but if it wasn't necessary for them, they should be very restricted.
We're supposed to end at 1:45, but you two have been very patient down here, so perhaps if we could. Nick, okay. One last round of 3. Lisa, Laurent, Nick.
Yeah. Laurent Siro, Swiss News Agency. Back on the Global Compact on Migration, there is a dozen of countries that negotiated and agreed to the compromise, and now decided not to go and not to endorse the Global Compact for internal reasons. Do you see that as a betrayal to multilateralism and to the declaration itself? And just quickly, 70 years, it's also the time to assess what could be improved in the text itself, what's missing in the declaration itself to cope with the challenges of the 21st century.
Thank you. Good morning, High Commissioner. Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. You were speaking about the threats to the declaration. Don't you see the composition of the Human Rights Council as one of these threats? You do have a number of known human rights abusers who are sitting on the council. Should you not clean house in order to strengthen the declaration? And on that topic, do you have a fear of a greater erosion of the principles which are enshrined in the declaration? And relating to Laurent's question just now, perhaps certain measures should be taken to strengthen the declaration and to increase its relevancy in today's world? Thank you.
Nick Cumming-Ruth, New York Times. There's been quite a consistent effort to promote human rights with Chinese characteristics as a global standard. In view of what's going on in Xinjiang and the long treatment of human rights defenders and lawyers in China, I wonder how you see that as consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
I'm really disappointed because so many member states have disengaged from Global Compact after having approved it. There were long months of negotiations. Some of the principal negotiators were the ones who afterwards said they won't come to Marrakesh to adopt it. And I said this because those negotiators were able to introduce language that for them feel comfortable with. So I'm really disappointed because I feel that probably what happens today in today's world is that many leaders look at the polls and see what people, I mean, instead of leading and giving examples, as I mentioned before, they are following the polls and see if people are concerned about migrants, fear about migrants and so on. And I do believe that political leaders need them to lead, need them to show the values, the principles, and make decisions. Because if you have any political capital, you have to use it to do the right thing. So I'm not going to qualify it, but I think I'm disappointed because of that. And what's missing? Well, I don't know if we are in love with the declaration, but we believe that the declaration is very, it's very, how could I say it? It's very, includes everything. Because when it includes, even you could think, okay, in the digital area or in artificial intelligence, do we need something different? No, we believe that everything that's there can be applied to technology, can be applied to the digital area, and so on. As a matter of fact, we are working on that. We are trying to work with companies on how we ensure that technology will expand people's rights and not restrict people's rights, because it can be used in different ways. So we believe that, I mean, until now, maybe tomorrow, even climate change, if you look at the different things, it will be sort of, I mean, it is what we should do about it. It is in some way reflected. Because it's a universal declaration, so it cannot be so specific in many particular issues. So I don't see the missing part, but maybe afterwards. But until now, I don't see the missing part. On the Human Rights Council, well, I think you know, as of January on membership, 114 of the 193 UN member states will have served as a member of the Human Rights Council. And I think this broad membership not only reflects the Human Rights Council diversity, but also gives the Council legitimacy when speaking out on human rights violation in all countries. So I would say no country has a perfect record on human rights. No state can rightly claim that they do not have human rights concern. Every state has it. So no state, on the other side, is immune from scrutiny of the human rights record, whether they are a member or not. And I think one of the interesting things of the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, is that all countries present their UPRs, and some countries have told us they were so impressed because they received like 200 recommendations, believing that they were perfect, or almost perfect. So I think that, of course, as you well know, the General Assembly will start the discussion on the reform of the Human Rights Council from 2020 to 2026. It's defined in the resolution. It could be do it faster, but that's the time it has. So probably one of the discussions of the Human Rights Council will be, first of all, it will be assessed how it's at work after the amount of years that will be since it was created. And secondly, it will be defined probably if the structure as it is continues or not. If it's a subsidiary organ that depends on the General Assembly as it is today, or if it's like an independent organ like the Security Council. So there will be a lot of discussions, and probably this issue that you raised on the memberships could be one issue that could be raised by some countries. But anyway, we always believe that it's good to countries to be engaged. And because when you sit at the Human Rights Council, you have to make a pledge, and those pledges is commitments on how you're going to advance and progress on human rights in your country. So it's important that they do engage and they're not out of the discussion and out of the, but also they will be submitted to as to a scrutiny of their human rights situations. On China, as you well know.
Sorry, I asked you a second question. And that was in regard.
Oh, yes, sorry.
The fear of erosion, yes.
Yeah, I just saw it, yes. Well, I don't know if, we have seen in these 70 years a lot of progress done. If we compare to 1948, at that time we had slavery, we had apartheid, we had colonialism, we had all kinds of problems in the world, wars, of course. And if you look at that, you could say we have had women's couldn't vote in many countries. So there has been progress made with the Universal Declaration. There has been also, I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of constitutions include many of the principles. A lot of national laws include many of the principles. So, and that is very important because that's a framework that should be respected and by member states, by governments, by civil society, etc. But we have also we have to confront other challenges, no? Conflicts, ethnic, religious conflicts. Conflict for economic crisis, and they all usually mean human rights violations. So a declaration is neither the cause of the conflict. It can help to solve, if you follow the human rights that are in the declaration, it could help you to solve many of the things. That's why we insist on dealing with the root causes of the conflict, because otherwise, of the root causes of migration, of the root causes of climate change, because otherwise you will have conflict when people feel that they are being left behind, when people feel that there are huge inequalities. They could go into some kinds of activities. For example, we have seen in some parts of the world where extremist groups come and they recruit a lot of young people because they don't see any options, any opportunities. So I do believe that countries need to work much more on prevention, on root causes, so the human rights of people will be protected, and I think we would see less conflicts. Of course, there will be, it's humanity, it's humankind, no one's perfect and we will have problems. But I think that we have seen it in the past, we have seen it now. We hope that we'll continue working strongly with youth, with people that to make this Universal Declaration a reality on the daily basis. I think young people really are people who are thinking in this way, who believes in these rights. So we need to continue working, talking, discussing. We need to continue engaging with governments so they can really fulfill its commitments, and that's what we're doing on the ground, on the field. For example, today we were receiving information from our people in Yemen because the plane for Stockholm left with delegations to the talks on both parts. So we are working on that, trying to ensure for example, to train commissions of inquiries, national commissions of inquiries in the different places. So I believe that what we cannot do is to stop speaking, stop working, stop being the voice of the voiceless, and of course, through capacity building and technical cooperation, supporting member states to do their jobs. So we are training police forces, we are supporting the reforms of the judiciary system in some places, etc. So I don't know if greater erosion of the principles is the word, but we have to continue working to stop human rights from being eroded. On the Chinese situation and the situation on Xinjiang, we continue to receive reports from a variety of sources about the human rights situation, particularly the re-education centers that China says it has established to address the concerns about potential violent extremism in Xinjiang. And we are in discussions with the government about this and follow the matter closely. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in August raised serious concerns about the re-education camps, and many states, 13 as a matter of fact, pressed China on this issue, and as have a group of UN special rapporteurs. So we have been asking, as I think I mentioned to you before, for direct access to the region to be able to check and verify the worrying reports that we are receiving. We have also offered technical assistance to the government on addressing threats posed by violent extremism. So in a way to sort of ensure the protection of human rights. So we wish to engage China in a serious dialogue on this pressing matter.
I'm sorry, human rights with the Chinese characteristics as consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or not?
There is a concept that many people, every time they discuss human rights, speak about is the right to development. But I truly believe that the human rights are not divisible. They're all of them. You cannot say that you cannot prioritize. You cannot say this human rights are important and the other ones not. So that's why I mentioned that you cannot invite somebody to your home, feed them, but don't allow them to speak. I mean, you have to ensure that all human rights are protected, and I think that's the spirit of the Universal Declaration.
So I'm afraid we have to end there. We've gone 15 minutes over anyway. High Commissioner did have something to say on Syria, but we'll send you that because there are alarming developments in Deir ez-Zor. So we'll send you a little comment on that.
Sorry, in the interest of our visual colleagues, it would be very good if the High Commissioner had something to say today on Syria, to be able to say it even briefly, please. Thank you.
Well, I'm really very concerned about the situation in Deir ez-Zor governorate, because, I mean, some weeks ago we were concerned about the Idlib situation, of course, but now in this other governorate, civilians are continuing being used as pawns and bargaining ships and continue to pay the highest price of the conflict. At least 7,000 civilians remain trapped in these ISIL's held areas, and these civilians are, of course, frightened and stuck between the intensifications of the airstrikes and bombardment against ISIL on one hand, and also being prevented from leaving the areas under ISIL's control on the other hand. So we have also reports of ISIL executing civilians perceived as cooperating with the SDF or other parties to the conflict. So we are really concerned about that. And we believe that all parties to the conflict, including all states conducting operations against ISIL, have an obligation under humanitarian international law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure at all times, as well as their obligations and their responsibilities to respect international human rights law. So we also want to urge all anti-government groups to take measures to ensure general protection of the civilian population and remove all military personnel and objects from civilian populated areas as required by international humanitarian law, because we believe that violation by one side does not justify disregard for international human rights and humanitarian law by others.
Thank you very much. We've really overrun a long time now, so we've got to rush off to the next engagement, but thank you for attending, and do your best for the Universal Declaration. Thank you.